He sat across from me last night, staring at the table like he wanted to set it on fire with his eyes. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might snap, and all he said was, "Go get a job if money's so tight." Can you believe that? After all these years, he throws that in my face. Alina leaned back on the couch, crossing her arms. Her voice was sharp, her words spilling out faster than she could catch them. I've spent 20 years of my life running this house, raising 2 kids who are now off living their own lives. And now, when I say we're not living the way I imagined, he acts like I'm the problem. Like I don't deserve more than just scraping by. Her words hung in the air, heavy with frustration. She looked at me, waiting for confirmation, validation, maybe even agreement. But I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her unravel her thoughts further. We've got a roof over our heads and food on the table, sure. But is that all there is? He used to promise me the world, said I'd never have to worry about a thing. And now, what? I'm supposed to downgrade my dreams because he's too tired to dream bigger. Her gaze flickered to the window, softening slightly. It's not like I don't appreciate him. I know he works hard, but he chose this. He said he'd take care of everything. I didn't make him promise that. I leaned forward, gently steering the conversation. Tell me, Alina. When you imagined your life back then, what did that dream look like? Her expression faltered, as if she hadn't been asked that in years. She hesitated, then shrugged. I don't know. A big house. Travel. A little freedom to spend money on things without checking the bank account twice. I guess I thought I'd feel safe. Her voice softened even more, almost breaking. But I don't. I feel like I'm holding my breath every time we get a bill in the mail. And then he has the nerve to tell me to work. After all this time. What would I even do? Who's going to hire a 38-year-old woman with no degree and no experience? He knows that. That's why he said it, to humiliate me. The words came out bitter, but there was something else behind them, fear. It was a fear I recognized all too well, the kind that hides under anger because it's easier to lash out than to admit you're scared. Let's take a step back, I said gently. You mentioned feeling like he humiliated you. Do you think he meant to hurt you with those words, or is it possible he's feeling overwhelmed himself? She frowned, chewing on the thought. I don't know. I guess he's tired. He works crazy hours, double shifts sometimes, and I know he's under a lot of pressure. But that's what being the provider means, isn't it? Taking care of the family. There was a pause, and I saw something shift in her expression. A crack, a small opening. What if providing isn't just about money, Alina? What if it's also about emotional support, shared responsibility, and understanding each other's limits? She looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of her sleeve. I didn't think it would feel like this. I didn't think I'd feel so stuck. Her vulnerability lingered in the room, unspoken yet palpable. It was the first step towards something deeper, something more honest. And to you, dear listener, what do you think? Could Alina's expectations be part of the problem, or is her husband failing to meet his promises? Let me know your thoughts, I'd love to hear your perspective. You know, it wasn't always like this. Alina's voice softened, her fingers nervously twisting the bracelet on her wrist. She stared at the floor as though the answers she sought might appear there. When we first got married, we were so happy. He worked hard, but back then it felt exciting, like we were building something together. I'd clip coupons, cook these elaborate meals on a tiny budget, and we'd laugh about it, saying someday we'd look back and remember the struggle fondly. She paused, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips, but it faded almost as quickly as it came. But then things didn't change. The struggles didn't go away, they just shifted. He started working more hours, and I stopped asking him when we'd have time for a vacation or buy something nice for the house. It felt pointless, like he was already carrying enough. I thought, if I just waited long enough, it would get better. Her eyes met mine briefly, searching for something. And now here we are. 20 years later, I'm still waiting. I thought I was being patient, but maybe I was just being stupid. What do you mean by that, Alina? Her shoulders tensed slightly, as though my question caught her off guard. I mean, I've spent all these years relying on him, thinking he'd eventually give me everything I wanted, but maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe it's my fault for believing him when he said he'd handle it all. I don't even know who I am anymore, outside of this house. Without him. The raw honesty of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Alina, what would happen if you tried to find out who you are now? She laughed bitterly. That's easy for you to say. You don't have to start over at 38 with no qualifications, no skills, and no confidence. What do I even bring to the table? I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone gentle but firm. You bring 20 years of managing a household, raising 2 children, and solving 1,000 problems that life threw your way. Those are skills, Alina. Don't sell yourself short just because they don't come with a degree or a title. Starting over isn't easy, but it's not impossible. And it might just help you feel less stuck. She frowned, her brow furrowing in thought. I don't even know where to start. It's been so long since I've done anything for myself. And what if I fail? What if I try and it just proves what I've been afraid of all along, that I'm not good enough? Failure is part of growth. It's not a reflection of your worth, it's just a step along the way. What matters is trying. It's not about being perfect, it's about moving forward, even if it's just one small step at a time. What's one thing you've always been curious about or wanted to try? She was quiet for a long time, the weight of my question settling over her. Maybe. I've always liked talking to people. And I guess I've thought about what it might be like to work somewhere like that cafe near our house. Nothing fancy, but I'd get to meet people, be part of something. But then I think about standing behind a counter at my age, and I just feel embarrassed. Why embarrassed? Do you think the people who work there are embarrassed to be contributing, to be doing something meaningful for themselves? Her eyes widened slightly, as though the thought had never occurred to her. I guess not. She folded her hands in her lap, her fingers no longer fidgeting with her bracelet. Maybe I'll think about it. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for things to change and start changing them myself. Her words felt tentative, but there was a flicker of determination behind them, a spark that hadn't been there before. If you've ever felt stuck or unsure of how to move forward, what steps helped you take the first leap? Or if you're still waiting for your moment, what's holding you back? Share your thoughts, I'd love to hear your stories. I couldn't sleep last night, Alina began, her voice quieter than usual. I kept thinking about everything we talked about. The cafe, finding something that's mine. It sounds so simple when you say it, but it doesn't feel simple. Her eyes flitted toward the window as though searching for reassurance outside. When I got married, I thought I was making the smartest choice of my life. A man like him, driven, dependable, loyal, he was everything I wanted. I told myself, you'll never have to worry about anything again. And for a long time, I didn't. He worked like a machine, always making sure the bills were paid, the kids had what they needed. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that being taken care of doesn't mean being fulfilled. She looked back at me, her expression a mixture of fear and curiosity. Have you ever met someone who's just tired of themselves? Like, not their life, not the people around them, but who they've become? I nodded, sensing how deeply this realization was cutting into her. I think that's what I'm feeling. It's not just about the money or the work anymore. It's about me. I don't even know who I am without this house, this routine, this constant cycle of asking for more and getting less. It's exhausting. She paused, rubbing her hands together as though trying to warm herself against the cold truth of her words. After our fight, I started thinking about him, too. I've always seen him as this provider, this unshakable force, but maybe I've been blind to how much he's been carrying. He looks older now, worn out. And I can't remember the last time I told him I appreciated him. Not really, anyway. When did we stop being a team? Her question lingered in the room, heavy and unanswerable. What do you think would happen if you told him that, Alina? Her lips parted slightly, as if the idea had startled her. I don't know. Maybe he'd laugh. Or maybe he'd think I was just trying to smooth things over so I wouldn't have to change anything. What if it's not about smoothing things over? What if it's just about being honest? Letting him know you see him, that you recognize what he's been doing all these years, and that you're ready to do your part, too. She exhaled slowly, the sound almost trembling. Do you really think it could make a difference? After everything I've said, after all the resentment that's built up between us, could it really matter? Honesty always matters. People can't fix what they don't know is broken. And sometimes, just being seen, truly seen, can change everything. She nodded faintly, as though testing the weight of my words against her own doubts. I guess I could try. It's not like things can get worse, right? There was a fragile hope in her voice, like a small bird learning to fly. To anyone listening, what do you think of Alina's journey so far? Have you ever faced a moment where honesty felt like the only way forward, even if it scared you? I'd love to hear how you navigated it. Feel free to share your thoughts, it might inspire someone else who's in the same place. When I told him, he didn't laugh. Alina's voice was softer, almost as if the memory of the moment had left her uncertain of how to feel. She shifted in her seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the carpet. He just looked at me, and for a second, I thought he might cry. I can't remember the last time I saw him so, exposed. Her lips curved slightly, a faint, almost bittersweet smile. I told him that I'd been thinking about everything, about us. About how I'd been so focused on what I wasn't getting that I stopped seeing what he was giving. I said I didn't mean to make him feel like nothing he did was ever good enough, but I knew that's exactly what I'd done. She glanced at me, her eyes searching for some kind of reassurance. I expected him to get angry, to tell me it was too late or that he didn't care anymore. But instead, he just shook his head and said, "Do you know how long I've been waiting to hear that?" Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard, brushing at the corner of her eye. I didn't know what to say. I guess I didn't realize how much he'd been holding in, too. He told me how tired he was, how he felt like he was on a treadmill that never stopped, running faster and faster just to keep up. And the whole time, he thought I was looking at him like it wasn't enough. She paused, taking a deep breath. I asked him what I could do to help, and that's when he said it, "Just try. I don't care what it is, just try to meet me halfway." And I knew he meant it. He wasn't asking me to solve all our problems or make up for the years I'd spent waiting. He just wanted to feel like we were in this together again. Her expression shifted, a mixture of resolve and nervous energy. I told him I'd been thinking about applying to the cafe down the street. It felt silly to say out loud, but he didn't laugh. He just nodded and said, "You'd be great at that." Can you believe that? After everything, he still thinks I can do something like that. She met my gaze, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I'm scared, though. What if I can't do it? What if I mess it up or can't keep up? I've been out of the real world for so long, I don't even know where to start. Starting is always the hardest part, Alina. But you've already taken the first step by talking to him, by being honest. The rest won't be perfect, and it doesn't have to be. It's about progress, not perfection. She nodded slowly, her fingers finally unclenching. I guess I've got nothing to lose. I mean, the worst that happens is I try, and it doesn't work out, right? At least then I'll know I didn't just sit there and wait for things to change on their own. There was a quiet determination in her voice now, a strength that had been buried beneath years of frustration and fear. If you've ever had to rebuild a connection with someone you love or face a fear of starting over, how did you manage it? Alina's taking her first steps, and your stories might inspire others who are standing at the edge of change. Feel free to share, I'd love to hear what's helped you move forward. I did it. I applied for the job. Alina's cheeks were flushed as she spoke, her voice carrying an unfamiliar mix of pride and disbelief. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, but there was an energy in her movements that hadn't been there before. I walked in, asked for the manager, and told him I was interested in the position. My hands were shaking so badly I thought I'd drop the pen when I filled out the application. But I did it. Her smile faltered slightly, replaced by a more reflective expression. When I was walking out, I saw my reflection in the window. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. It was like I was looking at someone else, someone braver, someone who didn't just talk about making changes but actually did it. I don't know if they'll hire me, but for the first time in years, I felt capable. Like I had some control over my own life again. She leaned back, exhaling deeply, her hands finally coming to rest. When I told my husband, he didn't say much. He just smiled and said he was proud of me. That's it, proud of me. I can't remember the last time I heard those words. It felt good, even if it was just for something small like this. Her voice softened as she glanced down at her hands. It's strange, though. I thought taking this step would fix everything, that the fear and doubt would disappear. But it's still there, hanging around like an old habit I can't shake. Part of me is still waiting for something to go wrong. I waited, letting her gather her thoughts. I think I've spent so long blaming him for my unhappiness because it was easier than admitting I was afraid. Afraid of failing, of being ordinary, of not living up to the version of myself I'd built in my head. And the truth is, I still don't know if I can live up to that version. But at least now I'm trying. Her words hung in the air, and I could sense the weight they carried for her. You're right, Alina. Fear doesn't disappear overnight, and self-doubt doesn't vanish just because you take one step forward. But trying, even when it's hard, is what builds courage. Every step you take, no matter how small, is a victory. And those victories add up. She nodded, a flicker of resolve in her eyes. Maybe that's what I need to focus on. Not the big picture, not the mountain I've built in my mind, but the small wins. Like applying for the job. Like having that conversation with him. Like getting up tomorrow and deciding to keep going. Her voice steadied, growing firmer with each word. I'm tired of waiting for someone else to change my life. It's not about golden mountains or who's to blame anymore. It's about what I can do with what I have, right here, right now. Her determination was clear now, the spark in her eyes brighter than before. If you've ever found yourself at a crossroads like Alina, how did you take those first steps toward change? Did it feel like the fear ever went away, or did you learn to move forward despite it? I'd love to hear your thoughts, every story has a lesson to share. They called me back. I got the job. Alina's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and excitement, as though she were still trying to convince herself it was real. She was sitting upright, her posture more confident than I had seen before. Her cheeks were flushed, and there was a lightness in her tone that hadn't been there during our earlier sessions. I start next week. It's just part-time for now, but the manager said I seemed like I'd be great with customers. Can you imagine that? Me, great with customers. She laughed, shaking her head slightly. I was so nervous walking in there for the second time. My hands were sweating, and I felt like everyone could see how out of place I was. But when I talked to the manager again, something shifted. He didn't look at me like I was just some desperate woman trying to figure her life out. He looked at me like I belonged there. And for the first time, I started to believe maybe I do. Her gaze softened as she leaned forward slightly, her hands resting loosely on her knees. My husband couldn't stop smiling when I told him. He even joked about coming in every day to order coffee just to see me in action. And when I asked him if he really thought I could do this, he said something I'll never forget. She paused, her voice quieter now. He said, "Alina, you've been stronger than you think this whole time. You just forgot it. I'm glad you're remembering now." Her eyes glistened briefly, and she blinked, as though brushing away the weight of the moment. "It's funny, isn't it? I spent years thinking he didn't appreciate me, but maybe I wasn't appreciating him either. It's like I finally realized how much we've both been fighting our own battles, just in different ways. I'm not saying everything's perfect now, but it feels like we're finally on the same side again." She smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that lit up her face. "And I've started noticing little things, too. Like how he still kisses me on the forehead before he leaves for work, even when I'm asleep. Or how he always makes sure my car has gas because he knows I hate filling it up. I spent so long waiting for grand gestures that I missed the everyday ones. And now that I see them, it's like they were there all along, just waiting for me to notice." Her voice softened again, more reflective. "I don't know where this is going to lead. I might love the job, or I might hate it. But for now, I'm proud of myself for taking this step. And I think he's proud of me too. That's enough for now." She leaned back, exhaling deeply, as though releasing the weight of years of doubt and frustration. Life doesn't always give us clear signs of when to start over or how to fix what's broken, but sometimes it's about taking one small step and seeing where it leads. If you've ever taken a leap of faith, big or small, what gave you the courage to do it? Share your story. You never know who might find hope in your words.